For well over 10 years, the Kremlin has held up two aircraft as evidence that Russia can still stand toe-to-toe with the West in cutting-edge military aviation. The first is the Su-57 Felon, a fifth-generation stealth fighter conceived as a rival to the American F-22 and F-35. The second is the PAK, a flying-wing stealth bomber pitched as an answer to the American B-2 Spirit and the newer B-21 Raider. Halfway through 2026, neither program has come anywhere close to fulfilling its original billing, and the air power gap separating Russia from the United States is widening rather than narrowing. The Su-57, airborne, but only just. Unlike the bomber program, the Su-57 is a genuine, flying, combat-capable aircraft, and that alone sets it apart from its stablemate. Even so, the numbers behind it point to an industrial base that is badly strained. Back in 2019, Russian officials pledged that 76 Su-57s would be operational by 2027 or 2028. Outside analysts no longer regard that figure as attainable. Estimates of Russia's total Su-57 inventory counting prototypes and non-combat airframes alongside frontline jets cluster somewhere between roughly 20 and 32 aircraft, with several defense-focused outlets converging on numbers in the low to mid-20s to low 30s for 2026. Narrow that down to jets that are genuinely combat-ready, and the figure shrinks further still. Output has crawled along at a sluggish pace. Lockheed Martin delivered a record 191 F-35s in 2025 alone, and by early March 2026 its cumulative production had passed 1,310 airframes. Russia's United Aircraft Corporation, known as UAC, announced nothing remotely comparable. Independent trackers suggest the real total of new Su-57s handed over in 2025 may have been as low as 1 or 2, though other reporting describes a somewhat larger, though still modest, run of deliveries earlier that year, including 2 additional aircraft in April 2025. A further large batch reported as 2 to 4 jets carrying upgraded avionics, among them a new 101KS optical self-defense suite reached the aerospace forces in February 2026. Even the more generous tallies put the total operational fleet only in the neighborhood of 30 to 42 aircraft, a number that has been floated as a long-standing production goal rather than something firmly achieved. The bottleneck traces back to the Komsomolsk-on-Amur aircraft plant in Russia's Far East, a facility that has struggled ever since Western sanctions cut off its access to precision manufacturing equipment it once imported. Leaked internal documents said to have been obtained by Ukrainian intelligence sources in late 2025 identified shortages of foreign-made tooling as a central choke point. Separate reporting in the spring of 2026 pointed to a fire on the composites production line at the Komsomolsk facility as an additional setback, and some jets reaching the aerospace forces are reportedly missing systems the design originally called for. In effect, Russia is fielding an incomplete airframe and describing it as combat-ready. There are signs, however, that Moscow is trying to work around the constraint. In July 2025, a deputy commander of the Russian aerospace forces stated that preparations were underway to accelerate deliveries following the opening of new production facilities, and Rostex had claimed in early May 2026 that combat aircraft production overall had doubled since the war's start in 2022, though estimates for the Su-57 specifically still describe output as modest relative to that claim. Flight testing has also continued on the aircraft's next generation ISDALI 177 engine, confirmed in December 2025, which is rated at up to 16,000 kilograms of thrust with afterburner and is intended to extend range and improve fuel efficiency. A newer strike weapon, the S-71K Cobra cruise missile built around composite materials and reportedly optimized to reduce its radar signature, has also begun entering service with Su-57 units, supplementing the older Kh-59/Kh-69 missiles already in the inventory. The aircraft's combat record has been a mixed and costly one for Russia. Su-57s have flown air defense suppression and strike missions, typically launching standoff weapons from well outside the range of Ukrainian air defenses rather than penetrating contested airspace directly. That caution has not spared the fleet from losses on the ground. Ukrainian forces struck a Su-57 at the Oktyabrsk airfield in Astrakhan region in June 2024 in the first confirmed attack of its kind, and a later strike on the Shagul airfield reportedly damaged or destroyed at least 2 more of the already scarce jets. In May 2026, Su-57s were involved in a missile strike on Dnipro using Kh-59/69 munitions alongside Su-34s, illustrating that the type is being folded into ordinary strike packages even as its numbers remain thin. Given a unit cost estimated at $100 million to $120 million, every loss represents a significant dent in an already small fleet. Several developments go beyond what Russian officials originally promised for the program. Satellite imagery reviewed by open-source trackers showed that Russia relocated roughly 15 Su-57s to Jiangji Air Base near the Chinese border, a move widely interpreted as an effort to keep the jets beyond the reach of Ukrainian long-range drone strikes rather than any signal of concern about Beijing. Algeria remains the only confirmed export customer, with an order reported at various points as either 6 or 14 aircraft. Russian officials claimed in November 2025 that the first 2 export jets had entered service with an unnamed foreign customer widely believed to be Algeria, and visual evidence of that delivery reportedly surfaced in February 2026. Washington has warned that the purchase could expose Algeria to U.S. sanctions. Vietnam has also been floated as a prospective buyer, seeking a replacement for its aging Su-27 fleet, and in a more striking development, Russia reportedly offered India full access to the Su-57 source code in May 2026 as part of a potential licensed production arrangement, after India signaled to U.S. officials that it was not interested in the F-35. On the technical side, a 2-seat Su-57D trainer variant reportedly made its first flight on May 19, 2026, and Russian state media has floated an enhanced Su-57M1 variant that may eventually replace the baseline jet on the production line, though the timing and scale of that transition remain unclear. The PAK, still barely more than a concept. The bomber program remains in far worse shape than the fighter effort. As of mid-2026, no independently verified PAK prototype has completed a flight test, and there are no confirmed flight images or open-source test reports to point to. One defense publication summed up the program bluntly, describing it as existing mostly in the form of AI-generated renderings and Kremlin press releases rather than hardware. The PAK's roots go back further than many of the recent headlines suggest. Studies for a new long-range bomber were commissioned as early as 2009, and Vladimir Putin personally pressed for the program in 2012 even as some Russian officials, including then Deputy Prime Minister Dmitry Rogozin, publicly questioned whether a new bomber made sense given advances in air defense technology. The design was settled by 2013 as a subsonic, flying wing aircraft emphasizing stealth over speed, capped at roughly Mach 1.0, with a stated range of up to 15,000 kilometers and a claimed payload capacity per Russian sources of around 30 tons, compared with roughly 20 tons for the American B-2. The Kazan aviation plant was selected in 2015 to build both prototypes and any eventual production aircraft, and a full-size mock-up was reportedly completed in 2017, followed by an engine development contract in 2018. Planning documents from as recently as 2022 described work on components for as many as 6 PAK airframes, though how much of that has actually translated into hardware remains unclear. Leaked contracts reportedly obtained by Ukrainian intelligence operatives attributed to the Experimental Design Bureau of Motor Engineering, or OKBM, describe the PAK's dependence on components shared with the already struggling Su-57 program, effectively pitting the two efforts against each other for scarce resources. The same leak reportedly pointed to reliance on Taiwan-manufactured CNC machining equipment for precision parts, equipment that an EU sanctions package targeted in October 2025, reportedly pushing some component deliveries out to 2027. This runs counter to earlier Russian claims, made as far back as 2022, that the bomber's design would be immune to sanctions because it uses no foreign components, a claim that leaked industrial documentation now appears to contradict. What exists in physical form, according to publicly available reporting, is at best a single static prototype, codenamed ISDAL-80, still undergoing component installation at the Kazan plant and intended purely for ground testing rather than flight. Russian state media has floated serial production beginning by 2027, but that timeline is treated with considerable skepticism by outside analysts, some of whom now question whether the aircraft will fly in any meaningful form before the early to mid-2030s, if it flies at all. British officials have periodically suggested the prototype was nearing completion, comments dating back to 2023 and 2024 that have not been matched by any confirmed milestone since. The numbers gap with the United States. The scale of the disparity between Russian and American fifth-generation air power is stark and, on current trends, growing. The U.S. Air Force operates roughly 165 to 183 F-22 Raptors, all fifth-generation stealth fighters, alongside more than 1,300 F-35s delivered to the United States and its allies, with Lockheed Martin's 2025 output alone setting a production record of 191 jets. Russia's entire Su-57 fleet, prototypes included, sits somewhere in the 20 to 32 aircraft range, smaller than the air wing of a single U.S. Navy aircraft carrier. Notably, U.S. F-35A procurement for 2026 has itself reportedly been trimmed from 48 to around 24 aircraft amid budget pressures on the U.S. Air Force, a reminder that America's own programs are not immune to strain even as they continue to dwarf Russia's in absolute terms. On the bomber side, the United States operates 20 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers that have flown combat missions since the 1990s, alongside the B-21 Raider, which made its first flight in November 2023 and is now advancing through production toward operational service. Russia's stealth bomber program, by contrast, has yet to produce a verified flying prototype of any kind. China's own stealth bomber effort, the H-20, has likewise not yet flown. For what it is worth, though China's J-20 stealth fighter fleet has reportedly grown past 50 aircraft and is being promoted for export, giving Beijing a clearer numerical edge over Moscow in fielded fifth-generation fighters, even as Washington's lead over both remains larger still. What this means going forward. In the near term, Russia's aerospace forces will keep leaning heavily on fourth-generation aircraft, principally the Su-35S and Su-34, together with modernized Tu-160 M2 bombers, none of which are stealthy. The 76 aircraft Su-57 target for 2027 to 2028 is now widely regarded by analysts as unreachable, and a more realistic trajectory looks like a continued slow trickle of a few dozen additional aircraft over the next several years, some still missing design capabilities. Leaked documents also indicate Russia is simultaneously restarting Tu-160 M2 production, with 7 airframes reportedly in the backlog and 4 already deep in modernization, targeted for completion in 2026, a program that appears partly intended to paper over the continued absence of a working stealth bomber. For the PAK, entry into serial production sometime in the 2030s, if the program survives at all, is now treated as the optimistic case rather than anything close to a certainty. The underlying story here is not really one of ambition or engineering talent. Russia has a genuine aviation design heritage stretching back generations. It is a story about industrial capacity, supply chains, precision tooling, and the sustained funding needed to carry a design from paper to a fielded aircraft at real scale. Sanctions imposed after 2022, compounded by the resource drain of the war in Ukraine, have struck precisely the kind of high-precision manufacturing that fifth-generation aircraft depend on, and both the Su-57 and the PAK show the strain of that squeeze.